In a small courthouse in Denver, Colorado, a 26-year-old woman named Claire McAdams sat clutching a manila folder filled with 3 years' worth of evidence. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of betrayal that had nearly destroyed her life. Across the room, her older brother Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his expensive suit, a suit that, as she would soon prove, was bought with money that should have kept her fed, housed, and hopeful during the darkest period of her life. What Judge Patricia Hernandez was about to hear would shock even her 25 years on the bench. This wasn't just a case about stolen disability benefits. This was a story about how family can become your greatest enemy, how the system designed to protect the vulnerable can fail them completely, and how sometimes justice comes not from the law, but from the courage to fight when everyone else has given up on you. But Claire's journey to this courtroom began 3 years earlier, in a very different place, when she still believed her brother was her protector.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Claire McAdams had always been the dreamer in the family. Growing up in suburban Phoenix, Arizona, she was the younger sister who painted murals on her bedroom walls, who wrote poetry in the margins of her textbooks, and who believed that art could change the world. Her older brother Marcus, 5 years her senior, was everything she wasn't: practical, ambitious, and laser-focused on financial success. While Claire spent her afternoons at community art centers teaching kids how to sculpt with clay, Marcus was climbing the corporate ladder at a tech startup, always talking about his next big investment opportunity. Their parents, Robert and Linda McAdams, had died in a car accident when Claire was 21, leaving behind a modest house in Phoenix and enough life insurance to get both siblings through their immediate transition to independence. Marcus inherited the house and took over managing the family finances, while Claire used her portion to rent a small studio apartment in the Arts District downtown, where she could pursue her passion for sculpture and pottery. For 2 years after their parents' death, life seemed to find its rhythm. Claire worked part-time at a local gallery while building her art portfolio, dreaming of one day opening her own studio where she could teach therapeutic art to people recovering from trauma. She had always been drawn to helping others heal through creativity, having seen firsthand how art had helped her process the grief of losing her parents so young. Marcus, meanwhile, had parlayed his tech job into a consulting business, advising small companies on their digital marketing strategies. He moved into their childhood home, renovated the basement into a home office, and seemed to be thriving. The siblings met for dinner once a month, usually at the same family-owned Mexican restaurant their parents had loved, where they'd catch up on their respective lives, and Marcus would always insist on picking up the check. "You're living the artist's life," he'd say, with a mixture of pride and concern. "But you need to think about your future too, Claire. Art is beautiful, but it doesn't pay the bills consistently." Claire would laugh and tell him she was managing just fine, thank you very much. Her gallery job provided steady income, and her pottery was starting to sell at local craft fairs. She felt independent, creative, and optimistic about her path forward. She had health insurance through the gallery, a small but comfortable apartment filled with her artwork, and a growing network of fellow artists who felt like chosen family. The accident changed everything in an instant. On a rainy Tuesday morning in March, Claire was driving to the gallery when a distracted driver ran a red light and slammed into the driver's side of her Honda Civic. The impact compressed 2 vertebrae in her lower spine and caused severe damage to her left leg. She spent 6 weeks in the hospital, undergoing multiple surgeries to repair the damage and prevent permanent paralysis. The doctors told her she was lucky to walk again, but walking was about all she could manage.
The nerve damage in her leg made it impossible to stand for long periods, which meant she couldn't teach pottery classes or work the long shifts at the gallery that required her to be on her feet for hours. The chronic pain in her back made it difficult to lift heavy clay pieces or work at her pottery wheel for extended periods. Her insurance covered the immediate medical costs, but the ongoing physical therapy and pain management treatments quickly became a financial burden. Within 3 months of the accident, Claire had lost her job at the gallery, not because they didn't want to help, but because the small business simply couldn't accommodate her new physical limitations and still maintain operations. Her art sales, which had never been substantial, practically disappeared as she struggled to produce new work while managing constant pain and exhaustion.
Marcus stepped in immediately. He helped her navigate the complex process of applying for Social Security disability insurance, spending hours on the phone with government offices, and helping her gather the extensive medical documentation required. When her savings ran out and she couldn't make rent, he offered to let her move back into their childhood home temporarily, just until she got back on her feet. "Your family," he told her, as he helped her pack up her studio apartment. "This is what family does for each other." Claire felt grateful, but also devastated. At 24, she was moving back into her teenage bedroom, sleeping in the same twin bed she'd had in high school, surrounded by boxes of her artwork that she couldn't properly display in the cramped space. Her independence, which had meant everything to her, evaporated overnight. The disability application process was a nightmare of bureaucracy and waiting. Months passed without word, while Claire's physical condition remained largely unchanged. Some days better, some days worse, but consistently limiting her ability to work a regular job. She spent her time doing gentle stretching exercises recommended by her physical therapist, trying to maintain some art practice with smaller projects that didn't aggravate her injuries, and applying for part-time work that might accommodate her limitations. Marcus was supportive throughout this period, driving her to medical appointments when she was having a particularly bad pain day, helping her organize her paperwork for the disability application, and assuring her that she could stay in the house as long as she needed. He never made her feel like a burden, which meant everything during such a vulnerable time. "The system is slow, but it works," he told her. "These benefits exist for exactly this reason, to help people who worked hard and paid into the system when they need support. You deserve this help, Claire. You've always been responsible, always worked, always contributed. This isn't charity. It's what you earned." During this waiting period, Claire noticed that Marcus seemed to be doing particularly well financially. He'd upgraded his car to a sleek BMW, taken several weekend trips to Las Vegas and San Diego, and started talking about investment opportunities in cryptocurrency and real estate. When she commented on his apparent success, he attributed it to his consulting business taking off and some smart investment decisions. "I've been working my ass off building this business while you've been dealing with your recovery. It's finally starting to pay off. And don't worry, when you're doing better, I'll teach you about investing too. We'll build your financial security together." Claire felt comforted by his confidence and success. She told herself that having a financially stable brother was actually a blessing during her time of need because it meant he could afford to support her without it being a genuine hardship for him. After nearly a year of waiting, Claire's disability application was finally approved. The monthly benefits rent generous, about $1,200 per month, but combined with the back payment covering the months since her application, it represented real financial relief. For the first time since the accident, she could see a path toward rebuilding some version of independence. Marcus handled all the paperwork associated with setting up the benefit payments, explaining that since she was living at his address, it made sense for the checks to come there, and he'd help her manage the money until she was feeling more stable and ready to move out on her own again. "This is great news, Claire," he told her when the approval letter arrived. "This gives you a foundation to build from. We can start looking at accessible apartments for you, maybe find you a part-time job that works with your limitations, get you back to a life where you feel like yourself again." Claire felt hopeful for the first time in months. The benefits weren't enough to live luxuriously, but they were enough to give her options, to start planning for a future that felt sustainable. She began researching accessible housing options and part-time work opportunities that might accommodate her physical limitations while still allowing her to pursue art in some capacity. She trusted her brother completely to help her navigate this new phase of her life. After all, he had been her rock through the most difficult period she'd ever experienced. He had opened his home to her, supported her through the bureaucratic maze of the disability system, and celebrated her small victories along the way. What Claire didn't know was that her trust was about to become the weapon used against her, and that the foundation she thought she was building was actually being stolen from beneath her, one monthly check at a time. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
The first sign something was wrong came 6 months after Claire's disability benefits were approved, on a humid August morning when she decided to surprise Marcus with his favorite breakfast from their old neighborhood bakery. She'd been feeling stronger lately. Her physical therapy was showing results, and she'd even managed to complete a small ceramic piece that sold at a local craft fair for $50. It felt like progress. Claire used the $20 Marcus had given her for personal expenses that week to buy fresh croissants, gourmet coffee, and the chocolate-filled pastries Marcus had loved since childhood. She wanted to do something nice for him after months of feeling like nothing but a burden in his house. When she arrived home, she found Marcus on a phone call in his home office, speaking in hushed but urgent tones. The basement door was slightly ajar, and she could hear fragments of conversation as she arranged the breakfast on a tray. The payment cleared yesterday, so we're good for the Vegas trip. No, she doesn't ask questions about the finances. I've got it handled, trust me. She's too focused on her recovery to pay attention to details. Claire felt a chill run down her spine. Marcus was planning another trip to Las Vegas, his third this year, and something about the way he was talking about payments and not asking questions made her stomach twist with unease. She climbed halfway down the basement stairs to listen more clearly. Look, I'm managing her benefits account along with everything else. She signed the forms, and as far as Social Security is concerned, I'm her representative payee. It's completely legal. What she doesn't know won't hurt her, and honestly, I'm doing most of the work anyway. Managing her care, dealing with her medical appointments, housing costs. The breakfast tray slipped from Claire's hands, sending ceramic plates crashing down the wooden stairs. Marcus immediately ended his phone call and rushed to the stairwell, finding Claire standing frozen among the broken dishes and scattered pastries. "Claire, are you okay? What happened?" He rushed up the stairs to help her, his voice filled with concern that now sounded hollow to her ears. "I brought you breakfast," she said slowly, staring at the mess. "I wanted to surprise you." "That's so sweet of you, but you know you shouldn't be carrying heavy trays with your back issues. What if you had fallen?" Claire watched him clean up, studying his face for any sign of guilt or discomfort. "Marcus, what's a representative payee?" He paused for just a moment, so briefly she almost missed it. "It's just a legal term for when someone helps manage another person's benefits. Since you've been staying here and recovering, I filled out some paperwork so I could help you keep track of your payments and expenses. It makes everything easier for both of us." "But the money comes to me, right? It's my disability payment." "Of course it's your money, Claire. I'm just helping you manage it while you focus on getting better." Marcus finished cleaning and straightened up, his expression patient but firm. "Why are you asking about this? Has someone been telling you something?" "No, I overheard part of your phone call, and it sounded like you were talking about my benefits." Marcus sighed, the way he used to when she was a teenager asking too many questions about something he considered beyond her understanding. "I was talking to my business partner about cash flow for our consulting projects. Sometimes I advance money from my personal accounts to cover business expenses, and then I reimburse myself when payments come in. It's just basic business accounting." His explanation sounded reasonable, and Claire wanted to believe it. Marcus had been nothing but supportive since her accident. He had sacrificed his privacy and comfort to house her during her recovery. She felt guilty for even questioning him, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Over the next few weeks, Claire began paying attention to details she had previously ignored. She realized she had never actually seen one of her disability checks. Marcus had explained that they were direct deposited into an account he had set up to make management easier, and that he gave her spending money each week for personal expenses and contributed the rest towards her living costs, medical expenses, and savings for her eventual independence. She started noticing other things too. Marcus's lifestyle seemed increasingly lavish for someone running a consulting business from his basement. The BMW had been joined by a motorcycle. He'd installed a hot tub in the backyard. His weekend trips had become more frequent and expensive-looking based on the photos he posted on social media from high-end restaurants and luxury hotels. When she asked about his business success, Marcus was always vague. "The market is really good right now for digital marketing consulting," he'd say. "I've got some long-term contracts that are paying well." But Claire never saw evidence of this thriving business. No clients ever called the house. No one ever came by for meetings. Marcus spent most of his days playing video games or working out, claiming his business was mostly maintenance and strategy at this point. One afternoon, while Marcus was out getting his car detailed, Claire decided to look through the mail that accumulated on the kitchen counter. She was looking for anything addressed to her, maybe medical bills or correspondence from Social Security, that she should be aware of. What she found instead was a credit card statement addressed to Marcus that had been opened and carelessly left on the counter. Claire wasn't trying to snoop, but the numbers jumped out at her. A $3,200 balance with recent charges for restaurants, hotels, and something called Golden Nugget Casino in Las Vegas. $3,200 was more than twice her monthly disability payment.
Marcus set down his fork and looked at her with what seemed like genuine concern. "Claire, I think it's great that you want to be more involved in managing your money. That's a really positive step. But are you sure you're ready for that level of stress? Managing finances can be overwhelming even for people who aren't dealing with chronic pain and recovery." "I think I can handle looking at bank statements, Marcus." "Of course you can. I didn't mean to suggest otherwise." He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I'll pull everything together for you this weekend. There are accounts at different banks, some savings bonds I set up for your long-term security, some investments that are doing really well. It'll take me some time to organize everything in a way that makes sense." "Investments? What kind of investments?" "Conservative stuff, mostly. Some index funds, a CD that's earning decent interest. Nothing risky." Marcus smiled. "I've been working really hard to make sure your money grows instead of just sitting in a checking account. You'll be impressed with how well we've done." Claire felt a mixture of relief and remaining unease. It sounded like Marcus was genuinely looking out for her financial future, but something still felt off about his reluctance to show her the details immediately. "Can I at least know how much I have in total, just so I can start planning?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Claire, I don't want you to get overwhelmed, but you've got about $8,000 in immediately accessible funds and another $15,000 or so in longer-term investments. Not bad for someone who's been focused on recovery instead of working, right?" The number seemed wrong to Claire, though she couldn't immediately put her finger on why. She had been receiving benefits for 8 months at $1,200 per month. Even accounting for living expenses, medical costs, and reasonable savings, the total seemed low, but math had never been her strong suit, and managing money while dealing with chronic pain and medication side effects was genuinely challenging. That night, Claire lay in her childhood bed doing calculations on her phone's calculator. 8 months of benefits at $1,200 per month should have totaled $9,600. Plus the back payment from Social Security that had covered the previous year of her application process, that had been another $14,400. So she should have received about $24,000 total. Marcus said she had $23,000 in various accounts and investments. The math seemed to work out, more or less. Maybe she was being paranoid. but Claire couldn't shake the memory of Marcus's phone conversation, or the way he had talked about her not asking questions, or the casual reference to managing her benefits as if they were something he had control over rather than something he was simply helping her track. 3 days later, Claire experienced what would become the defining moment of this entire ordeal. She was having a particularly bad pain day and had run out of her prescription pain medication a day early. Marcus was out of town on one of his weekend trips, and she needed to get to the pharmacy before it closed. She called a taxi and gave the driver the address for the CVS where she had always filled her prescriptions. But when she arrived, the pharmacist, a kind woman named Rosa, who had been handling Claire's medication since her accident, looked confused when Claire asked to pick up her prescription. "I'm sorry, Claire, but you show that your insurance is no longer active," Rosa explained, checking her computer screen. "The last payment we received was 3 months ago. We've been trying to contact you about the outstanding balance." "That's impossible," Claire said. "My brother has been managing my insurance payments through my disability benefits. There must be some mistake." Rosa showed her the computer screen, which displayed Claire's account with several red flags indicating unpaid balances and inactive insurance coverage. "Your insurance company sent multiple notices to your address. Have you not been receiving them?" Claire realized that Marcus had been collecting all the mail, organizing it, and handling anything that looked official or complicated. She had never seen insurance correspondence because he had been intercepting it. "How much do I owe?" Claire asked, though she was afraid to hear the answer. "For the outstanding prescriptions and the lapsed insurance, you're looking at about $1,800. Claire's legs nearly gave out. She didn't have $1,800. According to Marcus, her monthly personal expenses budget was $100, which barely covered basic necessities like toiletries and the occasional coffee with friends. She certainly didn't have access to the kind of money needed to resolve this crisis. She called Marcus immediately, but the call went straight to voicemail. She sent him a text explaining the situation and asking him to call her back urgently. No response. Claire spent the afternoon in the CVS parking lot making phone calls. She called her insurance company directly and discovered that premiums hadn't been paid in 4 months. She called Social Security and was transferred through multiple departments before reaching someone who could discuss her account. What she learned during that phone call changed everything. According to Social Security, her monthly benefit payments were being direct deposited into an account at Mountain Vista Bank, an account that was supposed to be accessible to her as the beneficiary, with Marcus listed as the representative payee to assist with management. Claire had never heard of Mountain Vista Bank. She had never seen a statement from Mountain Vista Bank. And according to the Social Security representative, the account should have contained not just her monthly payments, but also remained accessible to her for her direct needs. "Ma'am, as the beneficiary, you have the right to access information about how your benefits are being managed. A representative payee is supposed to use your benefits for your current needs first, and can only save money for your future needs after your immediate requirements are met." "What if my immediate needs aren't being met?" Claire asked. "Then you need to contact your local Social Security office immediately. That would be a serious violation of the representative payee guidelines." Claire hung up the phone and sat in the taxi staring at her childhood home as the driver waited patiently for her to decide their next destination. The house looked different to her now. The new hot tub, the freshly landscaped yard, the expensive cars in the driveway. For the first time since her accident, Claire felt something stronger than physical pain. She felt the burning clarity of betrayal, and with it came a determination she hadn't experienced since before her world fell apart. She was going to find out exactly what Marcus had been doing with her money, and she was going to get answers whether he wanted to give them or not. Claire spent the weekend alone in the house, waiting for Marcus to return from his Las Vegas trip. She had 48 hours to decide whether to confront him directly or investigate further on her own first. The weight of that decision felt heavier than any physical pain she'd endured since her accident. She used the time to methodically search through everything in the house that might contain information about her finances. In Marcus's home office, she found files labeled with her name, but they contained only medical records and the original disability application paperwork. Nothing about bank accounts, investments, or how her benefits were actually being managed. What she did find, however,
painted a disturbing picture of Marcus's personal finances. Credit card statements showed a pattern of escalating spending that coincided exactly with when her disability benefits had started. Restaurant bills from expensive steakhouses, charges from luxury hotels in multiple cities, payments to online gambling sites, and cash advances that totaled thousands of dollars per month. The most damning discovery was a handwritten note stuck to his computer monitor. SS deposit, 15th each month, $1,247. That was her exact monthly disability payment, tracked in Marcus's personal notes as if it were his own income stream. Claire photographed everything with her phone, her hands shaking as she realized the scope of what appeared to be happening. But she needed more than circumstantial evidence. She needed to see the actual bank records, and she needed to understand exactly how the representative payee arrangement worked before she made any accusations. On Sunday evening, Marcus returned from his trip in an unusually good mood, carrying expensive shopping bags and wearing a new Rolex that probably cost more than Claire's entire annual disability benefits. "How was your weekend?" he asked cheerfully, setting down bags from high-end stores she recognized from Las Vegas's luxury shopping district. "I brought you something." He handed her a small gift bag containing a cashmere scarf that still had the price tag attached, $340. "Marcus, this is beautiful, but it's way too expensive. You shouldn't spend this much on me." "Don't worry about it. I had a really good weekend. Won big at the poker tables." He grinned and showed off the Rolex. "Sometimes you get lucky, you know, and when you do well, you share with family." Claire felt sick. Every instinct told her that Marcus's lucky weekend was funded by money that was supposed to be securing her future, paying for her medical care and providing her with basic independence. "Marcus, I need to ask you about something serious," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. His expression immediately shifted from celebratory to cautious. "Okay, what's going on?" "I went to the pharmacy on Friday to pick up my medication, and they told me my insurance hasn't been paid in 4 months. They said I owe $1,800 in outstanding balances." Marcus frowned, looking genuinely puzzled. "That doesn't make sense. I've been managing all your medical expenses through your benefits account. Let me call them tomorrow and straighten this out." "I already called the insurance company, and I called Social Security." The color drained from Marcus's face so quickly that Claire knew, without any doubt, that her worst suspicions were correct. "Claire, I can explain. I want to see the bank statements. All of them. I want to see exactly where my benefits have been going for the past 8 months. Marcus sat down heavily on the couch, running his hands through his hair. For a long moment, he was silent, and I could practically see him calculating his options. "Okay," he said finally. "You deserve to know the truth, but it's complicated, and I need you to understand the full situation before you jump to conclusions." "I'm listening." Marcus took a deep breath. "Your disability benefits, they're not as much as Social Security originally told us they would be. There were some calculations they had to revise, some back payments that got reduced because of other factors. The actual amount coming in each month is only about $800. Claire knew this was a lie. She had spoken directly to Social Security and confirmed her benefit amount, but she wanted to hear how elaborate Marcus's deception was. Even at $800 a month, that should have been enough to cover my insurance premiums and still leave money for other expenses. That's what I thought too, but your medical costs have been much higher than either of us anticipated. The insurance premiums, your prescription copays, the physical therapy sessions that weren't fully covered, the special equipment for your back, it's been adding up to more than your benefits each month. So how have I been living here? How have you been covering my expenses?" This was where Marcus's story would either become believable or fall apart completely. "I've been supplementing your care with my own money," he said, meeting her eyes with what seemed like sincere conviction. "Claire, you're my sister. When your benefits weren't enough to cover your needs, I stepped in to make up the difference. I've been paying out of my own pocket to make sure you had
everything you needed.
How much of your own money? About $800 to $1,000 a month, sometimes more when you had extra medical expenses. Claire felt a moment of doubt. Could she have been wrong? Could Marcus actually have been supporting her financially rather than stealing from her? The math would work if her benefits were really only $800 and her expenses were higher than she realized. But then she remembered the Social Security representative confirming her benefit amount at $1,247 per month. She remembered Marcus's handwritten note with the exact figure. She remembered his phone conversation about managing her benefits account. Marcus, I appreciate everything you've done for me. I really do. But I need to see the actual records. I need to understand exactly what's happening with my benefits. Because Social Security told me my payments should be going into an account at Mountain Vista Bank, and I've never even heard of that bank. Marcus's face went through a series of micro-expressions. Surprise, calculation, resignation, and finally a kind of defensive anger. Fine, he said, standing up abruptly. You want to see the records? You want to question everything I've been doing to take care of you? Let's go to the bank tomorrow and you can see for yourself exactly how much money you actually have and how much I've been spending to keep you housed, fed, and healthy. Okay, yes, let's do that. But Claire, I want you to understand something. Marcus's voice took on a tone she'd never heard before, cold and slightly threatening. If you want to take over managing your own finances, that's fine. But that also means taking over responsibility for all your own expenses. Rent, utilities, food, insurance, medical costs, all of it. Because I'm not going to keep subsidizing your lifestyle if you don't trust me to manage your money responsibly. Claire felt as if she'd been slapped. The message was clear. Accuse him of wrongdoing, and she'd find herself homeless and unable to afford her basic needs. Are you saying that if I want to see my own financial records, you'll kick me out? I'm saying that if you want independence, you get independence. All of it. The good parts and the hard parts. They stared at each other across the living room, and Claire realized this was the moment that would define everything that came next. She could back down, accept Marcus's explanations, and continue living in uncertainty while remaining housed and cared for. Or she could push forward with her investigation, knowing that it might cost her the only stable living situation she had. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to apologize, thank Marcus for his support, and find a way to address her concerns more diplomatically. She was disabled, financially vulnerable, and dependent on his goodwill for her most basic needs. But as Claire looked at her brother, she realized that the person standing in front of her was not the same person who had comforted her after their parents' death, who had helped her through her disability application, who had welcomed her into his home during her recovery. This person was a stranger who saw her vulnerability as something to be leveraged rather than protected. Yes, she said quietly. Let's go to the bank tomorrow. I want to see everything. Marcus nodded, his expression unreadable. All right, then. We'll go first thing in the morning. But don't say I didn't warn you about what independence actually costs. That night, Claire lay in bed researching everything she could find about disability rights, representative payee responsibilities, and financial abuse of disabled individuals. What she learned was both empowering and terrifying. As a representative payee, Marcus was legally required to use her benefits first for her current needs: housing, food, medical care, clothing, and personal expenses. Only after those needs were met could he save money for her future. And, most importantly, he was required to provide her with detailed accounting of how her money was being spent any time she requested it. More disturbing was what she learned about financial abuse of disabled people. It was shockingly common, often perpetrated by family members, and frequently went undetected because victims were isolated, dependent on their abusers, and often doubted their own perceptions of what was happening. Claire also discovered that she had rights she didn't know existed. She could request a different representative payee. She could ask Social Security to investigate how her benefits were being managed. She could even request to manage her own benefits directly if she could demonstrate that she was capable of doing so. But exercising any of these rights would mean openly challenging Marcus, and she wasn't sure she was prepared for the consequences of that confrontation. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Claire made a decision that surprised her with its clarity. Tomorrow, she would go to the bank with Marcus and demand to see every record related to her benefits. If she discovered that he had been stealing from her, she would not keep quiet about it, regardless of the personal cost. She had spent 8 months feeling like a burden, like someone who needed to be grateful for whatever help she received. But she was beginning to understand that she wasn't a burden. She was a person with rights, and those rights had value, regardless of her physical limitations. The scared, dependent version of herself would have chosen safety and certainty, even if it meant living with doubt and possible exploitation. But lying in the darkness of her childhood bedroom, surrounded by boxes of artwork that represented the independent life she had lost, Claire decided that she would rather risk everything to reclaim her dignity than continue living as a victim of her own family's betrayal. Tomorrow would either restore her faith in her brother or destroy her relationship with the only family she had left. But either way, she would finally know the truth.
The Mountain Vista Bank branch on East Colfax Avenue was smaller than Claire had expected, tucked between a nail salon and a payday loan office in a strip mall that had seen better days. As Marcus pulled into the parking lot on Monday morning, Claire noticed his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. "Before we go in," Marcus said, turning off the engine but making no move to get out of the car, "I want you to remember that I've been doing my best to take care of you. Managing someone else's finances is complicated, and I've been learning as I go along. If there are mistakes, they're honest mistakes." Claire studied his profile as he stared straight ahead. "Okay. And I want you to remember that if you decide you don't like how I've been handling things, you'll need to take full responsibility for managing everything yourself. That means keeping track of every expense, dealing with all the government paperwork, making sure bills get paid on time. It's not as easy as you might think." "I understand." Inside the bank, Claire experienced her first shock before they even reached a tiller window. The lobby was filled with check-cashing advertisements in multiple languages, signs promoting high-interest loans, and warnings about account fees. This wasn't the kind of established, reputable bank where someone would typically keep disability benefits. This was the kind of place people went when they couldn't get accounts at legitimate financial institutions. Marcus approached a teller window staffed by a young man with heavily tattooed arms who greeted him by name. "Hey, Marcus, back again already. How'd Vegas treat you this weekend?" Claire felt her stomach drop. Marcus was a regular here, and the teller knew about his gambling trips. "Pretty well, thanks," Marcus replied, avoiding contact with Claire. "We need to check the balance and get some account statements for the Claire McAdams account." The teller looked confused. "Which account? You mean your joint account with Claire?" "No, her individual benefits account, the one where the Social Security payments are deposited." The teller checked his computer screen, frowning. "Marcus, I'm showing that all the Social Security deposits go into your joint account. Has that changed? Did you want to open a separate account for her?" Claire felt the world tilt sideways. There was no separate account for her benefits. Marcus had been depositing her disability payments directly into an account that he controlled completely. "Can you print out the statements for the joint account?" Claire interjected, her voice surprisingly steady. "For the past 8 months?" The teller looked between Marcus and Claire, clearly sensing tension. "I can do that, but I'll need ID from both account holders." Claire provided her driver's license, and the teller printed several pages of bank statements. As Claire reviewed them, the pattern of theft became undeniably clear. Every month, on the 15th, a deposit of $1,247 appeared, her exact disability benefit amount. And every month, within days of that deposit, there were large cash withdrawals, transfers to other accounts, and payments to places like Desert Diamond Casino, Bellagio Hotel, and Caesars Palace Las Vegas. In 8 months, Marcus had deposited $9,976 of her disability benefits into the account. The current balance was $247. "Where is my money, Marcus?"
Claire's voice cut through the quiet bank lobby. Marcus glanced around nervously, aware that other customers were beginning to stare. "Claire, can we discuss this at home? This isn't the place." "No, we're discussing this right here, right now." Claire turned to the teller. "This is supposed to be money for my disability benefits, for my medical care and living expenses. Can you show me where it went?" The young man looked deeply uncomfortable, but continued scrolling through the transaction history. "Ma'am, I can see there have been regular withdrawals and transfers. Most of the cash withdrawals were made in Nevada, and there are a lot of online transactions to what appear to be entertainment venues." "Casinos," Claire said flatly. "My disability money has been funding trips to casinos." "Now, wait a minute," Marcus said, his voice rising. "I've been using some of that money for legitimate expenses. Your medical bills, your housing costs." "Show me," Claire interrupted. "Show me one medical bill that was paid from this account. Show me one housing expense." Marcus fell silent because they both knew there was nothing to show. The bank statements revealed that Claire's money had been systematically stolen and gambled away, while she had been eating generic cereal for breakfast and wearing clothes from discount stores because her personal expense budget was supposedly too tight for anything better. The teller, who had been listening to this exchange with growing alarm, quietly placed a business card on the counter. "Ma'am, if you're concerned about how your accounts are being managed, you might want to speak to our customer advocacy department. They deal with situations where account access might not be what customers expected." Claire pocketed the business card, understanding that this young man was trying to help her without directly accusing Marcus of fraud in front of witnesses. "Thank you," she said. "Can I get copies of all the statements for my records?" "Of course, and ma'am, you can remove someone from a joint account or change your representative payee designation through Social Security if you need to." Outside the bank, Marcus was furious in a way Claire had never seen before. Gone was any pretense of concern for her well-being or explanation of honest mistakes. "You've embarrassed me in there," he said as they got back in the car. "That kid is going to remember this conversation, and now he thinks I'm some kind of criminal." "Are you?" "I'm your brother, Claire. I've been taking care of you when no one else would. Do you think it's been easy having you live in my house, dealing with your constant medical appointments, listening to you complain about pain every single day? Do you think I haven't sacrificed anything?"
Claire realized that Marcus genuinely believed his own justification. In his mind, housing her during her recovery gave him the right to use her benefits as compensation for the inconvenience she represented. "Marcus, that money was supposed to pay for my housing, my food, my medical expenses. If you were covering those costs, then you should have receipts showing that. But you don't, because you weren't paying for anything. You were just taking the money. I was taking care of you. You were taking care of yourself. With my money." They drove home in silence, but Claire could feel Marcus's anger radiating through the car. She realized that she had crossed a line from which there was no return. Marcus no longer saw her as his vulnerable sister who needed protection. Now she was a threat to his lifestyle, someone who might expose his theft and force him to face consequences. That afternoon, while Marcus was out, Claire called the customer advocacy number from the business card. The woman who answered, Jennifer Walsh, had clearly dealt with similar situations before. "Miss McAdams, what you're describing is a very serious matter. If your representative payee has been using your disability benefits for his personal expenses rather than your care, that's a federal crime. But proving it and getting justice can be challenging, especially when the person involved is a family member." "What are my options?" "First, you need to document everything. Get copies of all bank statements, keep records of conversations, photograph any evidence you can find. Second, you need to report this to Social Security immediately. They can investigate and potentially assign you a different representative payee or restore your right to manage your own benefits." "What about the money that's already gone?" Jennifer's pause was telling. That's where it gets complicated. You might be able to pursue criminal charges or civil litigation, but recovering stolen benefits can be difficult, especially if the money has been spent rather than saved. However, your brother would be legally required to repay misused benefits. Would I need a lawyer? For criminal charges, no, that would be handled by prosecutors, but for civil recovery, having legal representation would be very helpful. There are some legal aid organizations that specialize in disability rights cases. I can give you some contact information. Claire spent the rest of the afternoon making phone calls. She contacted the Legal Aid Society of Denver, the Colorado Disability Rights Coalition, and the local Social Security office to schedule an in-person appointment. Each conversation taught her more about her rights and options, but also about the challenges ahead. The most important call was to Adult Protective Services. Although Claire wasn't elderly, the representative explained that financial abuse of disabled adults fell under their jurisdiction, and they could begin an investigation that might support any legal action she decided to pursue. The hard part, the APS investigator explained, is that many victims of financial abuse by family members choose not to pursue prosecution because it means potentially sending a relative to jail. Are you prepared for that possibility? Claire thought about Marcus's new Rolex, about the $340 scarf he'd given her as if it were a generous gift, about the months she'd eaten generic food while he gambled away her disability benefits in Las Vegas. Yes, she said, I'm prepared for that. When Marcus returned home that evening, he found Claire sitting at the kitchen table with a notebook, her laptop open, and a pile of papers spread around her. What's all this? He asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected. I'm educating myself about my rights as a disability beneficiary and about representative payee responsibilities. Did you know that using my benefits for anything other than my direct care is a federal crime? Did you know that Social Security requires you to keep detailed records of how my money is spent and provide those records to me on request? Marcus leaned against the kitchen counter, crossing his arms. Claire, I think you're getting worked up over nothing. Maybe you should talk to your doctor about adjusting your pain medication. Sometimes those pills can make people paranoid or confused. It was a low blow, an attempt to make her doubt her own mental clarity, and it backfired completely. Don't you dare, Claire said, her voice cutting through his dismissiveness. Don't you dare try to gaslight me by blaming my medication. I know exactly what I saw in those bank statements. You saw 8 months of me keeping you alive and healthy when your benefits weren't enough to cover your actual costs. I saw 8 months of you stealing my money to fund gambling trips while letting my insurance lapse and my medical care suffer. Marcus pushed off the counter and stepped closer to the table, his presence suddenly intimidating. You know what your problem is, Claire. You've never lived in the real world. You've always had someone taking care of you. First mom and dad, now me. You have no idea what things actually cost or how hard it is to manage real adult responsibilities. Then teach me. Show me the receipts for my housing costs, my food, my medical expenses. Show me how you've been spending my money on my care. I don't owe you an accounting of every penny I've spent keeping you afloat. Actually, legally you do. That's exactly what a representative payee is required to provide. For a moment, Marcus looked like he might continue arguing. Then his expression shifted to something Claire recognized from their childhood, the look he got when he was about to do something he knew was wrong but felt justified in doing anyway. Fine, he said. You want independence? You want to manage your own finances? You've got it. I want you out of my house by the end of the week. Claire had expected this moment, but the reality of it still hit like a physical blow. She was being evicted by her own brother for daring to question where her disability benefits had gone. Where am I supposed to go, Marcus? You know I can't afford rent without my benefits. That's not my problem anymore. You've made it clear you don't trust me or appreciate what I've done for you. So now you get to figure out your own life. As Marcus walked out of the kitchen, leaving Claire alone with her research and her growing understanding of just how badly she'd been betrayed, she realized that her investigation had only just begun.
Getting Marcus to admit what he'd done would be nothing compared to proving it legally and figuring out how to rebuild her life from nothing. But for the first time since her accident, Claire felt something that had been missing for months, a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with managing pain or accepting help graciously. She was going to fight for what was hers, and she was going to make sure this never happened to anyone else.
Claire had exactly 4 days to find a place to live and figure out how to survive on her own. Marcus had made it clear that their childhood home was no longer an option, and with less than $300 in accessible money and no current income source, her options seemed impossibly limited. But something had shifted in Claire during that confrontation at the bank. Instead of feeling defeated, she felt energized by a clarity she hadn't experienced since before her accident. For the first time in months, she had a concrete problem to solve that didn't involve managing pain or accepting help. She had a mission that required every bit of intelligence, resourcefulness, and determination she possessed. Her first call was to Sarah Chen, an attorney with the Legal Aid Society who specialized in disability rights cases. Sarah agreed to meet with Claire that same day at a coffee shop near the downtown courthouse, explaining that disability benefit theft cases were more common than most people realized. The challenge, Sarah explained as they sat in a corner booth surrounded by Claire's printed bank statements and research notes, is that representative payee arrangements are designed to be flexible. Proving misuse requires showing that the money wasn't spent on the beneficiary's legitimate needs, and that can be subjective. But look at these transactions, Claire said, pointing to the bank statements. Thousands of dollars at casinos, luxury hotels, expensive restaurants. None of that was for my benefit. Sarah nodded, studying the documents. These are clearly problematic transactions, but your brother will likely argue that he was covering your housing and living expenses out of his own pocket, and therefore using some of your benefit money for his personal expenses was reasonable compensation. Except he wasn't covering my expenses. My insurance lapsed, I was buying my own food with the small allowance he gave me, and I was living in my childhood bedroom surrounded by boxes because he said there wasn't money to help me get my own place. That's the key, Sarah said, her eyes lighting up. If we can prove that your basic needs weren't being met while he was spending your benefits on luxury expenses, we have a strong case for both civil recovery and criminal charges. What do I need to prove that? Sarah pulled out a legal pad and began writing. Medical records showing gaps in care due to financial barriers, documentation of your living conditions, evidence of your actual expenses versus what he was providing, and most importantly, we need to establish a timeline that shows your benefits were being diverted rather than used for your care. How do I gather all of that when I'm getting kicked out of his house in 4 days? First things first, you need immediate housing and financial stability. Have you contacted Social Security about changing your representative payee status? Claire explained that she had an appointment scheduled for Wednesday morning. Sarah nodded approvingly. Good. That should restore your access to your monthly benefits. In the meantime, I can connect you with emergency housing resources for disabled individuals. There's a nonprofit called Second Chance Housing that specifically helps people in situations like yours. That afternoon, Claire met with Maria Rodriguez, a case manager at Second Chance Housing, who operated out of a converted Victorian house in the Capitol Hill neighborhood. Maria listened to Claire's story without judgment, taking notes on an intake form that clearly indicated this wasn't the first case of family financial abuse she had encountered. We have a transitional apartment available, Maria explained. It's small, a studio with accessible features, but it's yours for up to 6 months while you get back on your feet. The rent is income-based, so once your benefits are restored, you'll pay about 30% of your monthly payment toward housing. Claire felt tears of relief welling up. Really? I can move in immediately? We can have you moved in by tomorrow if you need it. But Claire, I want you to understand something important. Taking the step, moving out on your own, and pursuing legal action against your brother is going to be difficult. Family financial abuse cases are emotionally exhausting, and proving your case will require you to relive the worst parts of this experience multiple times. What's the alternative? Some people choose to cut their losses and focus on moving forward rather than seeking justice. There's no shame in that choice. Recovery doesn't have to include revenge. Claire thought about the 8 months of feeling grateful for Marcus's generosity while he systematically stole from her. She thought about the insurance crisis that could have left her without essential medication. She thought about the $340 scarf he'd given her as a gift, purchased with her own money. "It's not about revenge," she said. "It's about making sure this doesn't happen to other people. And it's about proving to myself that I'm not helpless."
Wednesday morning's appointment at the Social Security office was both validating and infuriating. The benefits specialist, Robert Kim, reviewed Claire's case file and confirmed what she had suspected. "Ms. McAdams, based on what you're telling me and the documentation you've provided, there appear to be serious violations of representative payee guidelines. Your brother was required to use your benefits first for your immediate needs: housing, food, medical care, clothing, personal expenses. Only excess funds should have been saved for your future." "He told me he was saving money for my future and covering my expenses with his own money." "But your insurance lapsed, which suggests your medical needs weren't being prioritized. And you're describing a living situation that doesn't sound like appropriate housing for someone receiving these benefits." Robert made notes in Claire's file. "I'm going to initiate an investigation into your representative payee arrangement and begin the process of restoring direct payment to you." "How long will that take?" "The investigation could take several weeks, but I can expedite the process of getting your benefits paid directly to you. You should see your next payment in your own account within 2 weeks." "What about the money that's already been misused?" Robert's expression grew serious. "That's where it gets complicated. Social Security can require a representative payee to repay misused benefits, but enforcement can be difficult. You might need to pursue civil or criminal action to recover those funds." That afternoon, Claire moved into her new studio apartment with nothing but her clothes, her art supplies, and a determination that surprised her with its intensity. The apartment was basic, a single room with a kitchenette, accessible bathroom, and large windows that filled the space with natural light. After months of living in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by reminders of her dependence, the simple studio felt like a palace. Her first night alone, Claire sat on the floor of her empty apartment — she couldn't afford furniture yet — and made a comprehensive plan. She had learned more about disability law, financial abuse, and her own rights in the past 3 days than she had in the previous 8 months. Now she needed to transform that knowledge into action. She started by documenting everything she could remember about the past 8 months. What expenses had Marcus claimed to cover that he actually hadn't? When had her insurance lapsed, and how had that affected her medical care? What lies had he told her about her financial situation, and when had he told them? Claire also began researching Marcus's business claims. If he was really running a successful consulting company, there should be evidence of legitimate income that could have funded his expensive lifestyle. She searched business registration databases, looked up his consulting company's website, and even called the phone number listed for his business. What she discovered was that Marcus's consulting company existed only on paper. The website was a basic template with stock photos and generic text about digital marketing solutions. The phone number went to voicemail with a generic recording. There were no client testimonials, no case studies, no evidence of actual business activity. Every dollar of Marcus's luxury lifestyle appeared to be funded by her disability benefits. On Thursday evening, Claire received a call that changed everything. It was Jennifer Walsh from Mountain Vista Bank's Customer Advocacy Department. "Ms. McAdams, I wanted to follow up on your visit earlier this week. After you left, we conducted an internal review of the account in question, and we discovered some irregularities that we're required to report to federal authorities." Claire's heart began racing. "What kind of irregularities?" "Without going into details that might compromise an ongoing investigation, I can tell you that the transaction patterns on your joint account triggered several red flags in our fraud detection systems. We forwarded our findings to the appropriate federal agencies." "Does that mean Marcus is going to be investigated?" Ms. McAdams, I can't comment on specific investigations, but I can tell you that misuse of disability benefits is taken very seriously by federal law enforcement. If someone has been systematically diverting disability payments for personal use, that's not just theft, it's a federal crime with significant penalties. After hanging up, Claire sat in her empty apartment as the reality of the situation sank in. What had started as her personal quest for answers was now becoming a federal investigation. Marcus wasn't just going to face social embarrassment or family consequences. He was potentially looking at criminal charges. For a moment, Claire felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she had set in motion. Marcus was still her brother, still the person who had helped her through their parents' death and supported her through the disability application process. The thought of him facing serious legal consequences felt surreal. But then she remembered the months of eating cheap food while he enjoyed expensive restaurants, the anxiety of wondering why her insurance had lapsed while he wore a Rolex, the humiliation of feeling grateful for his generosity while he systematically stole from her. Most importantly, she thought about other disabled people who might be experiencing similar abuse, who might be too isolated or dependent to fight back, who might never discover that their trust was being exploited. That night, Claire made a decision that would define the rest of her journey. She was going to see this through completely, regardless of the personal cost. Not just for her own justice, but to establish that financial abuse of disabled people would have real consequences. She had spent 8 months as a victim. Now it was time to become an advocate for herself and for everyone else who had ever been too vulnerable to fight back.
3 weeks after moving into her studio apartment, Claire received the phone call that nearly shattered her newfound confidence. She was sitting on her floor cushions, still the only furniture she could afford, working on a small clay sculpture when her phone rang with an unknown local number. Ms. McAdams, this is Detective Angela Torres with the Denver Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. I need to speak with you about your complaint regarding disability benefit misuse. Claire's heart leaped. Finally, law enforcement was taking her case seriously. Yes, I've been waiting to hear from someone. I have extensive documentation. Ma'am, I'm calling because we've completed our preliminary investigation, and I need to inform you that we will not be pursuing criminal charges against your brother at this time. The words hit Claire like a physical blow. What? Why not? I have bank statements showing he stole nearly $10,000 of my disability benefits. Ms. McAdams, we understand your frustration, but the evidence suggests a more complicated situation than straightforward theft. Your brother has provided documentation showing that he was covering substantial expenses for your care: housing, utilities, food, transportation to medical appointments. His attorney has presented a detailed accounting that shows his personal expenditures were reasonable compensation for the out-of-pocket costs he incurred supporting you. His attorney? Claire's voice came out as a whisper. Marcus McAdams retained counsel as soon as he learned about our investigation. His legal team has provided receipts and expense records showing that your living costs exceeded your disability benefits by approximately $400 per month. They argue that his use of benefit funds for personal expenses represented legitimate reimbursement for costs he covered on your behalf. Claire felt the world spinning around her. Detective Torres, he wasn't paying for my insurance. He wasn't buying my food. I was living in my childhood bedroom eating cereal for dinner while he spent my money gambling in Las Vegas. I understand your perspective, Ms. McAdams, but proving financial abuse requires demonstrating that the victim's needs weren't being met while benefits were being diverted. Your brother's attorney has provided documentation suggesting your basic needs were being met, and that any personal use of benefits was reasonable compensation for additional expenses he incurred. What documentation? What receipts? Detective Torres sighed. Utility bills showing increased costs during the period you lived with him, grocery receipts showing increased food purchases, mortgage payments demonstrating that housing you represented a significant expense, transportation logs showing mileage for driving you to medical appointments. Claire realized with growing horror that Marcus had been preparing for this possibility all along. He had been creating a paper trail that would make his theft look like legitimate expense reimbursement.
Detective, can I see this documentation? Can I challenge it? You're welcome to review the materials through your attorney, but Ms. McAdams, I need to be direct with you. Financial abuse cases between family members are extremely difficult to prosecute, especially when the accused party has legal representation and documentation supporting their version of events. Prosecutors need cases they can win, and this case would likely end in acquittal. After hanging up, Claire sat in stunned silence for nearly an hour. Everything she had worked toward for the past month, the carefully documented evidence, the witness statements, the federal investigation she thought was building, had been neutralized by Marcus's attorney in a matter of weeks. She called Sarah Chen immediately, hoping her legal aid lawyer could explain how this had gone so wrong so quickly. Claire, I'm so sorry. I should have warned you that Marcus might retain counsel and begin creating counter-documentation. This is a common defense strategy in benefit misuse cases. So what do we do now? We continue building our civil case. The burden of proof in civil court is lower than in criminal court. We don't need to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he stole from you. We only need to show by a preponderance of evidence that he misused your benefits. But if the police won't prosecute him, how are we going to prove anything in civil court? She was quiet for a moment. Claire, I need to be honest with you about something. Marcus's legal team has also filed a motion challenging your mental competency to manage your own benefits. The words hit Claire like ice water. What does that mean? They're arguing that your brain injury from the car accident, combined with your ongoing pain medication use, has impaired your judgment and memory. They've requested that Social Security conduct a mental competency evaluation before restoring direct benefit payments to you. Claire felt her carefully constructed foundation crumbling beneath her feet. Sarah, I wasn't brain injured in the accident. I had spinal injuries and leg damage. My mind is completely fine. I know that, and you know that. But Marcus's attorney has submitted medical records they claim suggest otherwise. They've also provided sworn statements from people who say they've observed concerning behavior from you. What people? What concerning behavior? According to the filing, Marcus has statements from neighbors who say you've been observed talking to yourself, appearing confused about dates and appointments, and exhibiting what they describe as erratic behavior. Claire's mind raced through the past months trying to understand how normal activities could have been twisted into evidence of mental impairment. Had she talked to herself while working on art projects? Probably. Many artists did that. Had she seemed confused about dates? Possibly, when chronic pain and medication made it difficult to track time precisely. Claire, this is a sophisticated legal strategy, Sarah explained. By challenging your competency, they're not just defending against your accusations. They're trying to ensure that even if you win, you won't be able to control your own benefits in the future.
The full implications hit Claire like a sledgehammer. If Marcus's legal team succeeded in having her declared mentally incompetent, she would be assigned a new representative payee, potentially someone she didn't know, who would control her finances indefinitely. She would have traded one form of financial abuse for another. What's our next move? We prepare for the competency evaluation. You'll need to demonstrate that you can manage your own finances, understand complex information, and make reasonable decisions about your care. Meanwhile, we continue gathering evidence for the civil case. Claire left the meeting feeling more defeated than she had since the day of her accident. Marcus hadn't just stolen her money, he was systematically destroying her credibility and trying to have her declared mentally incompetent. The legal system she had hoped would protect her was now being weaponized against her. That evening, Claire received a text message from Marcus that felt like salt in an open wound. Claire, I heard you're facing some legal challenges around your mental health evaluation. If you want to come home and work this out as a family, the door is always open. I never wanted things to get this complicated. The manipulation was breathtaking. Marcus was offering to rescue her from the legal consequences of exposing his theft, positioning himself as the generous brother willing to forgive her accusations. Claire's response was immediate and final: stay away from me. But Marcus's legal strategy was working exactly as intended. Over the next week,
Claire discovered just how effectively her credibility had been undermined. When she called Adult Protective Services to follow up on her case, the investigator informed her that the criminal referral had been withdrawn pending the resolution of questions about her mental competency. When she contacted local disability advocacy groups for support, several organizations explained that they couldn't provide assistance to individuals whose mental capacity was under legal challenge, as it created liability issues for their programs. Even her new housing situation became precarious when Second Chance Housing received a call from someone claiming to be concerned about Claire's ability to live independently safely. Claire, Maria Rodriguez, explained during an emergency meeting, "We received a call from someone identifying himself as your brother, expressing concern that you're not taking your medication consistently and that you've been exhibiting signs of confusion and poor judgment. He suggested but independent living might not be appropriate for your current mental state." Claire felt her world collapsing. "Maria, that's not true. I take my medication exactly as prescribed, and I've been completely clear and rational in all our interactions. You can see that, right?" Maria studied Claire's face carefully. "Yes, I can see that. You've been one of our most organized and proactive residents. But Claire, these allegations create a problem for us. If there are legitimate concerns about your mental competency, our insurance requires that we have those concerns properly evaluated before we can continue providing housing. So Marcus can make anonymous phone calls questioning my sanity, and that's enough to get me evicted? Not evicted, but we do need documentation from a qualified mental health professional confirming your capacity for independent living before we can continue the program." Claire left that meeting understanding that Marcus's legal strategy was more comprehensive than she had imagined. He wasn't just defending against her accusations, he was systematically isolating her from every support system she had built, using her disability status as a weapon against her. That evening, alone in her studio apartment that she might lose within days, Claire experienced the darkest moment of her entire ordeal. She had tried to fight for justice and instead had discovered that the person who had stolen from her was better prepared for legal battle than she was. Marcus had resources, legal representation, and a strategy designed to paint her as an unreliable victim whose accusations couldn't be trusted. Worse, his tactics were working. The criminal case had been dropped. Her civil case was compromised by questions about her mental capacity. Her housing was threatened, and her support systems were backing away due to legal liability concerns. Claire found herself wondering if she should have stayed silent, accepted Marcus's control over her benefits, and focused on her recovery rather than seeking justice. Maybe the stable but controlled life he had offered was better than this uncertain independence that seemed to be falling apart around her. She called her old friend Jessica from the Phoenix art community, the first person she'd spoken to from her pre-accident life since moving to Denver. "Claire, I've been wondering how you were doing. How's your recovery going?" "Jess, can I ask you something? Do I seem mentally unstable to you? Like, when we talk, do I sound confused or irrational?" Jessica laughed. "What? No, you sound exactly like yourself. Why would you ask that?" Claire explained the situation, and Jessica's response was immediate and fierce. "Claire, this is exactly what abusers do. They convince everyone around you that you can't trust your own perceptions. But I've known you for 8 years, and you're one of the most level-headed people I know." "But what if I'm wrong? What if my medications are affecting my judgment? What if I'm remembering things incorrectly? Do you have documentation of what happened? Bank statements, recorded phone calls with Social Security, written records of everything? Then trust your documentation over other people's opinions about your mental state. Facts don't lie, Claire. People do." After hanging up with Jessica, Claire made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. She was going to stop defending her sanity and start attacking Marcus's credibility. If he wanted to play legal games, she would learn to play them better. The next morning, Claire called every number in Marcus's phone that she could remember from his business cards and website. She started introducing herself as her sister and explaining that she was trying to verify his income for a legal matter. What she discovered confirmed her suspicions. Marcus had no legitimate consulting clients. The few people who answered her calls had either never heard of him or had worked with him briefly a year ago on small projects that paid a few $100s. More importantly, she found someone willing to contradict Marcus's version of events. Tom Bradley, a former colleague from Marcus's tech company days, had actually visited the house several times during the period when Claire was living there. I remember being surprised that Marcus never mentioned having a sister. He was always talking about his investments and business success, but when I was there, you seemed to be buying your own groceries and doing your own laundry. It didn't seem like he was taking care of you financially. Would you be willing to provide a written statement about what you observed? Absolutely. What Marcus did to you is disgusting. I'm actually not surprised. He always struck me as someone who would take advantage of people if he thought he could get away with it. As Claire hung up the phone, she realized that Marcus's greatest strength, his overconfidence, was about to become his greatest weakness. He had been so certain that she would never fight back effectively that he had been careless about covering his tracks completely. The breakthrough moment wasn't a single revelation, but a shift in understanding. Claire wasn't fighting this battle alone, and she wasn't as powerless as Marcus had tried to convince everyone.
The mental competency evaluation was scheduled for a Friday morning in November, exactly 1 month before Claire's civil case against Marcus was set to go to trial. Dr. Patricia Lawson, a court-appointed neuropsychologist, would spend 3 hours testing Claire's cognitive abilities, memory function, and decision-making capacity. The results would determine not just whether Claire could manage her own benefits, but whether her testimony against Marcus would be considered credible. Claire had spent 2 weeks preparing with Sarah Chen, practicing the types of questions and tasks that would be included in the evaluation. They reviewed her medical records, organized her documentation chronologically, and prepared responses to likely challenges about her medication use and pain management. Remember, Sarah advised the night before the evaluation, they're not just testing whether you can balance a checkbook. They're testing whether you can understand complex information, make reasonable decisions, and communicate clearly about important matters. Everything you've done to build this case, the research, the documentation, the strategic planning, proves you have those capabilities. The evaluation itself was more intense than Claire had anticipated. Dr. Lawson administered cognitive tests, memory assessments, and problem-solving exercises designed to reveal any mental impairments that might affect Claire's ability to manage her affairs independently. The hardest part wasn't the tests themselves, but the questions about her relationship with Marcus and her decision to pursue legal action. Some people might argue, Dr. Lawson said during the interview portion, that pursuing a legal case against your only family member, when that family member provided you housing during a difficult period, might not be in your best interests. How do you respond to that perspective? Claire had anticipated this question. Dr. Lawson, if someone stole $10,000 from me and I wasn't disabled, would anyone question my decision to seek legal recourse? The fact that I'm disabled doesn't mean I should accept being victimized. In fact, it makes the crime more serious, not less. But your brother did provide you with housing and support during your recovery. Yes, and I'm grateful for that support. But providing support doesn't give someone the right to steal from the person they're helping. Those are separate issues entirely. Dr. Lawson made notes throughout the interview, and Claire couldn't read her expression to determine how the evaluation was going. 2 weeks later, the results arrived in a formal report that would change the trajectory of Claire's entire case.
Dr. Lawson's evaluation concluded that Claire demonstrated superior cognitive functioning across all measured domains and showed no evidence of impaired judgment or decision-making capacity related to financial or personal matters. More importantly, the report specifically noted that Claire's decision to pursue legal action appears to be based on rational analysis of documented evidence rather than emotional dysfunction or cognitive impairment. With her mental competency officially confirmed, Claire's credibility was restored, and her civil case could proceed without the cloud of doubt that Marcus's legal team had tried to create. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Tom Bradley, Marcus's former colleague who had agreed to provide a witness statement, called Claire with information that would prove devastating to Marcus's defense. "Claire, I've been thinking about what we discussed, and I remembered something important. Last summer, Marcus asked to borrow $5,000 from me for what he called a family emergency. He said you needed expensive medical treatment that wasn't covered by insurance. Did you lend him the money?" "I did. But here's the thing. He paid me back 3 weeks later with cash, which seems strange for someone who was supposedly financially strained by medical expenses. And when he paid me back, he was wearing that expensive watch and talking about planning another trip to Las Vegas. Would you be willing to testify about this?" "Absolutely. Because I just realized that he was probably using your benefits money to pay me back for a loan he claimed was for your benefit. That's fraud, plain and simple." This testimony would prove that Marcus had been systematically lying about his financial situation, using Claire's benefits for his personal expenses, and manipulating other people by claiming financial hardship while living a luxury lifestyle. The civil trial began on a cold Monday morning in December. Judge Patricia Hernandez presided over a courtroom that was surprisingly full. Sarah had contacted local disability advocacy organizations, and several representatives had come to observe a case that could set important precedents for benefit misuse litigation. Marcus arrived with his attorney, David Morrison, a well-dressed man who had clearly prepared an aggressive defense strategy. But Claire noticed something different about Marcus's demeanor. Gone was the confident, slightly condescending attitude he had maintained throughout their childhood. He looked nervous, diminished somehow, like a person who had finally been forced to face the consequences of choices he thought he could make without accountability. Sarah's opening statement was devastating in its simplicity. "Your Honor, this case is about $9,729 in disability benefits that were supposed to ensure Claire McAdams could live independently and receive necessary medical care. Instead, those benefits were systematically diverted to fund luxury vacations, gambling, and personal expenses while Claire's basic needs went unmet." Morrison's response attempted to reframe the entire narrative. "Your Honor, this case is about a young woman who has unfortunately misunderstood a complex financial arrangement. Marcus McAdams provided his sister with housing, food, transportation, and emotional support during the most difficult period of her life, and he did so at considerable personal expense." But Morrison's defense began falling apart during the first day of testimony. Claire took the stand first, walking the court through her discovery of the theft with calm, precise detail. She presented bank statements, recorded phone conversations, and documented timelines that painted an unambiguous picture of systematic benefit misuse. "Ms. McAdams," Mr. Morrison said during cross-examination, "isn't it true that you were grateful for your brother's support during your recovery?" "Yes, I was grateful. I was also being lied to about how my benefits were being used." "And isn't it true that living independently has been difficult for you, that you've struggled with housing stability and financial management since leaving your brother's home?" "I've been learning to manage my own affairs, yes, but the difficulties I've experienced are largely because my brother stole the money that was supposed to help me transition to independence." "Objection," Sarah interjected. "Assumes facts not in evidence." "Sustained," Judge Hernandez ruled. Morrison tried a different approach. "Ms. McAdams, you're taking multiple pain medications. Is it possible that these medications have affected your memory or perception of events?" "Mr. Morrison, I've been evaluated by a court-appointed neuropsychologist who found no evidence of cognitive impairment.
My testimony today is based on documented evidence, not memory alone. When Tom Bradley testified about the $5,000 loan and Marcus's contradictory claims about financial hardship, Morrison's cross-examination revealed the weakness of Marcus's entire defense strategy. Mr. Bradley, you claim that Mr. McAdams seemed to have disposable income, but isn't it possible he was simply managing his finances carefully? Managing finances carefully doesn't usually involve borrowing money for fake emergencies and then paying it back with cash while wearing a new Rolex. Tom responded, "The testimony that ultimately sealed Marcus's fate came from an unexpected source. Rosa Martinez, the pharmacist from CVS who had alerted Claire to her insurance problems. Rosa testified about the multiple occasions when Claire had been unable to afford necessary medications because her insurance had elapsed due to non-payment. She also testified about Marcus visiting the pharmacy on Claire's behalf and using his own credit card to pay for prescriptions when Claire couldn't afford them. But here's what she found suspicious. Marcus would pay for his sister's medications with his credit card, but then he would also submit those receipts to the insurance company for reimbursement once the insurance was restored. So he was getting paid back for expenses he claimed he was covering out of generosity. This testimony proved that Marcus had been systematically double billing for Claire's care, using her benefits to fund his lifestyle while also collecting reimbursement for expenses he claimed he was covering personally. Judge Hernandez's ruling came after only 2 hours of deliberation.
This court finds that Marcus McAdams violated his duties as representative payee by systematically diverting disability benefits intended for his sister's care to fund his personal expenses. The evidence shows a pattern of financial exploitation that continued for 8 months, resulting in nearly $10,000 in misused benefits. Mr. McAdams is ordered to repay the full amount of misused benefits plus interest within 60 days. Additionally, this court is recommending criminal investigation by federal authorities for disability benefit fraud. Ms. McAdams, your right to manage your own benefits is hereby restored, and this court commends you for your courage in exposing this abuse despite significant personal and legal challenges. 6 months after Judge Hernandez's ruling, Claire stood in the sunlit studio space she had just signed a lease for in Denver's Arts District. The room was 3 times the size of her temporary housing, with high ceilings, exposed brick walls, and large windows that filled the space with natural light perfect for her pottery work. Marcus had ultimately been unable to repay the stolen benefits and had been forced to sell their childhood home to satisfy the court judgment. Federal prosecutors had also filed criminal charges for disability benefit fraud, and he was facing up to 2 years in prison plus substantial fines. But Claire discovered that justice felt more complex than she had expected. There was satisfaction in having her experience validated by the legal system, but there was also grief for the relationship with her brother that could never be repaired. "I don't hate him," Claire explained to Sarah Chen during their final meeting to close out the legal case. "I hate what he did, and I hate that he forced me to fight so hard for basic justice. But mostly, I feel sad that he chose money over family." The most unexpected outcome of the legal battle was how it had transformed Claire's relationship with her disability. Instead of seeing her physical limitations as something that made her vulnerable to exploitation, she now understood them as part of her identity that deserved protection and respect. Claire had started a nonprofit organization called Benefit Guardians that provided advocacy and education for disabled individuals dealing with representative payee abuse. She worked with legal aid organizations across Colorado to train attorneys about the specific challenges of disability benefit theft, and she spoke at conferences about financial abuse prevention. "The thing people don't understand," Claire told audiences during her speaking engagements, "is that financial abuse of disabled people isn't just about money. It's about autonomy. When someone steals your benefits, they're stealing your ability to make choices about your own life." Her art practice had also evolved in ways she never could have anticipated. The pottery pieces she created now incorporated themes of resilience,
justice, and transformation. Her work was being displayed in galleries throughout Denver, and she had developed a therapeutic art program specifically for people recovering from various forms of abuse and exploitation. The studio apartment had become both her home and her workspace, a symbol of the independence she had fought to reclaim. She had decorated it with pieces from her legal battle, the original bank statements framed on the wall as a reminder of how documentation had saved her, photographs from the day she moved into her first independent housing, and letters from other disability benefit theft victims who had reached out after learning about her case. Claire still dealt with chronic pain from her accident, and she still had limitations that affected her daily life, but she had learned to see those challenges as manageable obstacles rather than defining characteristics that made her dependent on others' goodwill. The transformation was perhaps most visible in her relationships. She had developed genuine friendships with other disability advocates, people who understood both the practical challenges and the emotional complexity of living with limitations while fighting for equal treatment. She had also reconnected with old friends from Phoenix who had supported her throughout the legal battle and who now visited her regularly in Denver. You know what's strange? Claire told Jessica during one of these visits as they worked together on a large ceramic installation piece. I'm grateful that Marcus stole from me. That's a weird thing to be grateful for. If he hadn't been so greedy, so obvious about it, I might never have discovered my own strength. I spent my whole life thinking I needed someone to take care of me, especially after my accident. But it turns out I'm pretty capable of taking care of myself. On the 1-year anniversary of moving into her studio space, Claire received an unexpected piece of mail, a handwritten letter from Marcus, postmarked from the federal minimum security prison where he was serving his 18-month sentence. Claire, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and I understand if you never want to see me again. I want you to know that I never intended for things to go as far as they did. It started as borrowing money I planned to pay back, and it became something I couldn't control. I'm getting help here for gambling addiction, and I'm working with a financial counselor to understand how I let my problems become your problems. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that watching you fight for yourself taught me something about the person I used to be versus the person I became. I'm proud of what you've built since the trial. I've seen articles about your advocacy work and your art. You're doing exactly what you always said you wanted to do, using your creativity to help people heal. I know I can't undo what I did, but I hope someday you'll be able to think of me as the brother who helped you discover how strong you really are, rather than just the brother who betrayed your trust. Claire read the letter twice before folding it carefully and placing it in a box where she kept other documents from the legal case. She wasn't ready to forgive Marcus, and she might never be, but she understood that his acknowledgement of what he had done was part of her own healing process. The most profound change in Claire's life wasn't material, but psychological. She had discovered that disability didn't equal helplessness, that vulnerability didn't require accepting abuse, and that fighting for justice was possible even when the system seemed stacked against you. As she worked on a new sculpture inspired by her journey, a piece called Transformation that would be displayed in the courthouse where Judge Hernandez had vindicated her claims, Claire reflected on how completely her life had changed. 2 years earlier, she had been a struggling artist living paycheck to paycheck, dreaming of making a difference through her work, but not sure how to turn that dream into a reality. 1 year earlier, she had been a victim of financial abuse, isolated and dependent, accepting explanations that made her doubt her own perceptions. Now she was an advocate whose work was protecting vulnerable people across the state, an artist whose work sold in galleries and conveyed powerful messages about justice and resilience, and a person who understood that her disability was just one aspect of her identity rather than its defining characteristic. The studio space around her was filled with evidence of the life she had built through her own determination. Commissioned art pieces waiting to be shipped to collectors, files containing correspondence with other advocates and legal organizations, and thank you letters from disabled individuals who had successfully challenged their own representative payee arrangements after learning about Claire's case. On her desk sat a framed copy of Judge Hernandez's ruling. Not because she needed reminding of her legal victory, but because the judge's words had captured something essential about Claire's journey. This court commends Ms. McAdams for her courage in exposing this abuse despite significant personal and legal challenges. Claire had learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear or uncertainty. It was the decision to act according to your values even when the outcome was uncertain and the personal cost was high. As evening light filled her studio through the large windows, Claire put the final touches on transformation. The sculpture was abstract but unmistakably hopeful, curves that suggested movement upward and outward, textures that spoke of both struggle and growth, and an overall form that seemed to capture the moment when something constrained breaks free and discovers its own power. Tomorrow she would deliver the piece to the courthouse, where it would be displayed in the lobby, a permanent reminder that justice was possible for people who had been written off as too vulnerable to fight for themselves. Tonight, she would finish the proposal for expanding benefit guardians into a statewide program funded by a grant from the Colorado Disability Rights Foundation. And next week, she would start teaching pottery classes again, this time in her own studio, to other disabled individuals who were working to rebuild their lives after various forms of abuse and exploitation. Claire McAdams had started this journey as someone who needed protection. She was ending it as someone who provided protection to others. Her disability benefits, which Marcus had stolen to fund his gambling addiction, were now funding a life dedicated to preventing other people from experiencing the same betrayal. The transformation was complete, but the impact was just beginning. Every person Claire helped, every policy change her advocacy work achieved, every disabled individual who learned they had rights worth fighting for, all of it traced back to that moment when she had decided to investigate those suspicious bank statements, despite the personal risk. As she locked up her studio and walked home through the Denver streets she now knew by heart, Claire realized that Marcus had been wrong about almost everything, but accidentally right about one thing. Independence did have a cost. The cost was accepting full responsibility for her own life, facing uncertainty without a safety net, and learning to trust her own judgment even when others questioned it. But independence also had a value that Marcus had never understood. The knowledge that every success, every achievement, every moment of happiness was genuinely earned rather than dependent on someone else's willingness to provide it. Claire McAdams had paid that cost willingly, and the life she had built in return was more fulfilling than anything she could have imagined during those dark months when she felt like nothing more than a burden her brother was graciously carrying. She was no longer anyone's burden. She was a force for justice, an artist whose work mattered, and a person whose story would inspire others to fight for what they deserved. The scared young woman who had moved back into her childhood bedroom after a devastating accident no longer existed. In her place was someone stronger, wiser, and more determined than she had ever thought possible. Marcus had tried to steal her future. Instead, he had inadvertently taught her how powerful she really was.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.